Hello again. I just now realized I forgot to put on my fancy filters like the little color correction and all that good stuff, but I don't think anyone really minds either way. We're just I mean, it's been a while since the last time I did this, so I think I'm just gonna you know, like we're just gonna get right back into it, I guess. Yeah, speaking of like the fireplace ambience and all that stuff, I actually just figured out a couple days ago that you can on the iPhone, you can like have it so that like it plays background noise behind like whatever you're listening to. So for the past couple days I've just been like listening to like the rain ambience and like like the ocean one and like the stream one. It's been nice. I also have my tea with me. It's still hot. I just made it like 10 minutes ago, I think. Or thereabouts. But yeah, I guess hello Oedipus Reps. Once again, hello. Oh, I got like some like lemon peel on my tongue. Hold on. That's gross. But yeah, I guess we're probably just gonna get right into it right now. I figured out which chapter I'm on. It seems like we're getting near. Oh my, Olga Okami, thank you for the follow, much appreciated. But it seems like we're getting near to the end. The version of this ebook that I downloaded has like a little bit of like, it has like a preview of the sequel, like Dr. Sleep or whatever it's called, but I don't think we're gonna be reading that. Also, hello. Much appreciated. But it seems like we only have like 150 pages to go or so. So that's good. Let me take a sip of water. Okay. I think I'm in like optimal reading condition. But we're on to chapter 34, The Hedges. It was November 29th, 3 days after Thanksgiving. The last week had been a good one. The Thanksgiving dinner, the best they'd ever had as a family. Wendy had cooked Dick Halloran's turkey to a turn, and they had all eaten to bursting without even coming close to demolishing the jolly bird. Jack had groaned that they would be eating turkey for the rest of the winter. Creamed turkey, turkey sandwiches, turkey and noodles, turkey surprise. No, Wendy told him with a little smile. Only until Christmas. Then we have the capon? I'm not sure how to pronounce that. I think that's like a fancy word for ham or whatever. Jack and Danny groaned together. The bruises on Danny's neck had faded, and their fears seemed to have faded with them. On Thanksgiving afternoon, Wendy had been pulling Danny around on his sled, while Jack worked on the play, which was now almost done. Are you still afraid, Doc? She had asked, not knowing how to put the question less baldly. Yes, he answered simply, but now I stay in the safe places. Your daddy says that sooner or later the forest rangers will wonder why we're not checking in on the CB radio. They'll come to see if anything is wrong. We might go down then, you and I, and let your daddy finish the winter. He has good reasons for wanting to. In a way, Doc. I know this is hard for you to understand. Our backs are against the wall. Yes, he had answered noncommittally. On this sparkling afternoon, the two of them were upstairs, and Danny knew that they had been doing various things I can't repeat out loud. They were dozing now. They were happy, he knew. His mother was still a little bit afraid, but his father's attitude was strange. It was a feeling that he had done something that was very hard and he had done it right. But Danny could not seem to see exactly what the something was. His father was guarding that carefully, even in his own mind. Was it possible, Danny wondered, to be glad you had done something and still be so ashamed of that something that you tried not to think of it? The question was a disturbing one. He didn't think such a thing was possible in a normal mind. His hardest probings at his father had only brought him to a dim picture of something like an octopus whirling up into the hard blue sky. And on both occasions that he had been concentrating hard enough to get this, Daddy had suddenly been staring at him in a sharp and frightening way, as if he knew what Danny was doing. Now he was in the lobby, getting ready to go out. He went out a lot, taking his sled or wearing his snowshoes. He liked to get out of the hotel. When he was out in the sunshine, it seemed like a weight had slipped from his shoulders. He pulled a chair over, stood on it, and got his parka and snow pants out of the ballroom closet, and then sat down on the chair to put them on. His boots were in the boot box, and he pulled them on, his tongue creeping out into the corner of his mouth in concentration as he laced them and tied the rawhide into careful granny knots. He pulled on his mittens and his ski mask, and he was ready. He tramped out through the kitchen to the back door, then paused. He was tired of playing out back, and at this time of day, the hotel's shadow would be cast over his play area. He didn't even like being in the overlook shadow. He decided he would put on his snowshoes and go down to the playground instead. Dick Halloran had told him to stay away from the topiary, but the thought of the hedge animals did not bother him much. They were buried under snowdrifts now, nothing showing but a vague hump that was the rabbit's head and the lion's tails. Sticking out of the snow the way they were, the tails looked more absurd than frightening. Danny opened the back door and got his snowshoes from the milk platform. 5 minutes later, he was strapping them to his feet on the front porch. His daddy had told him that he, Danny, had the hang of using the snowshoes. The lazy, shuffling stride, the twist of ankle that shook the powdery snow from the lacings just before the boot came back down. And all that remained was for him to build up the necessary muscles in his thighs and calves and ankles. Danny found that his ankles got tired the fastest. Snowshoeing was almost as hard on your ankles as skating, because you had to keep clearing the lacings. Every 5 minutes or so he had to stop with his legs spread and the snowshoes flat on the snow to rest them. But he didn't have to rest on his way down to the playground because it was all downhill. Less than 10 minutes after he struggled up and over the monstrous snow dune that had drifted in on the overlook's front porch, he was standing with his mittened hand on the playground slide. He wasn't even breathing hard. The playground seemed much nicer in the deep snow than it ever had during the autumn. It looked like a fairyland sculpture. The swing chains had been frozen in strange positions, the seats of the big kid swings resting flush against the snow. The jungle gym was an ice cave guarded by dripping icicle teeth. Only the chimneys of the play overlook stuck up over the snow. Wish the other one was buried that way, only not with us in it. And the tops of the cement rings protruded in two places like Eskimo igloos. Danny tramped over there, squatted, and began to dig. Before long he had uncovered the dark mouth of one of them, and he slipped into the cold tunnel. In his mind he was Patrick McGowan, the secret agent man. They had shown the reruns of that program twice on the Burlington TV channel, and his daddy never missed them. He would skip a party to stay home and watch Secret Agent or The Avengers, and Danny had always watched with him. On the run from the KGB agents in the mountains of Switzerland. There There had been avalanches in the area, and the notorious KGB agent Slavo had killed his girlfriend with a poisoned dart. But somewhere near was the Russian anti-gravity machine. Perhaps at the end of this very tunnel. He drew his automatic and went along the concrete tunnel, his eyes wide and alert, his breath pluming out. The far end of the concrete ring was solidly blocked with snow. He tried digging through it and was amazed and a little uneasy to see how solid it was, almost like ice from the cold and the constant weight of more snow on top of it. His make-believe game collapsed around him, and he was suddenly aware that he felt closed in and extremely nervous in this tight ring of cement. He could hear his breathing. It sounded dank and quick and hollow. He was under the snow, and hardly any light filtered down the hole he had dug to get in there. Suddenly, he wanted to be out in the sunlight more than anything. Suddenly, he remembered his daddy and mommy were sleeping and didn't know where he was. That if the hole he dug caved in, he would be trapped, and the Overlook didn't like him. Danny got turned around with some difficulty and crawled back along the length of the concrete ring, his snowshoes clacking woodenly together behind him, his palms crackling in last fall's dead aspen leaves beneath him. He had just reached the end and the cold spill of light coming down from above when the snow did give in. A minor fall, but enough to powder his face and clog the opening he had wriggled down through and leave him in darkness. For a moment his brain froze in utter panic and he could not think. Then, as if from far off, he heard his daddy telling him that he must never play at the Stovington dump, because sometimes stupid people hauled old refrigerators off to the dump without removing the doors. And if you got in one and the door happened to shut on you, there was no way to get out. You would die in the darkness. You wouldn't want a thing like that to happen to you, would you, Doc? No, Daddy. But it had happened, his frenzied mind told him. It had happened. He was in the dark, he was closed in, and it was as cold as a refrigerator, and something is in here with me. His breath stopped in a gasp. An almost drowsy terror stole through his veins. Yes, yes. There was something in here with him, some awful thing the Overlook had saved for just such a chance as this. Maybe a huge spider that had burrowed down under the dead leaves, or a rat, or maybe the corpse of some little kid that had died here on the playground. Had that ever happened? Yes, he thought maybe it had. He thought of the woman in the tub, the blood and brains on the wall of the presidential suite. Of some little kid, its head split open from a fall from the monkey bars or a swing, crawling after him in the dark, grinning, looking for one final playmate in its endless playground. Forever. In a moment he would hear it coming. At the far end of the concrete ring, Danny heard the stealthy crackle of dead leaves as something came for him on its hands and knees. At any moment he would feel its cold hand close over his ankle. That thought broke his paralysis. He was digging at the loose fall of snow that choked the end of the concrete ring, throwing it back between his legs in powdery bursts like a dog digging for a bone. Blue light filtered down from above, and Danny thrust himself up at it like a diver coming out of deep water. He scraped his back on the lip of the concrete ring. One of his snowshoes twisted behind the other. Snow spilled down inside his ski mask and into the collar of his parka. He dug at the snow, clawed at it. It seemed to be trying to hold him, to suck him back down, back into the concrete ring where that unseen leaf-crackling thing was, and keep him there forever. Then he was out, his face was turned up to the sun, and he was crawling through the snow, crawling away from that half-buried cement ring, gasping harshly, his face almost comically white with powdered snow, a living fright mask. He hobbled over to the jungle gym and sat down to readjust his snowshoes and get his breath. As he set them to rights and tightened the straps again, he never took his eyes from the hole at the end of the concrete ring. He waited to see if something would come out. Nothing did, and after 3 or 4 minutes, Danny's breathing began to slow down. Whatever it was, it couldn't stand the sunlight. It was cooped up down there, maybe only able to come out when it was dark, or when both ends of its circular prison were plugged with snow. But I'm safe now, I'm safe. I'll just go back because now I'm... Something thumped softly behind him. He turned around toward the hotel and looked. But even before he looked, can you see the Indians in this picture? He knew what he would see because he knew what that soft thumping sound had been. It was the sound of a large clump of snow falling, the way it sounded when it slid off the roof of the hotel and fell to the ground. Can you see? Yes, he could. The snow had fallen off the hedgehog. When he came down, it had been only a harmless lump of snow outside the playground. Now it stood revealed, an incongruous splash of green in all the eye-watering whiteness. It was sitting up as if to beg for a sweet or a scrap. But this time he wouldn't go crazy. He wouldn't blow his cool. Because at least he wasn't trapped in some dark old hole. He was in the sunlight, and it was just a dog. It's pretty warm out today, he thought hopefully. Maybe the sun just melted enough snow off that old dog so the rest fell off in a bunch. Maybe that's all it is. Don't go near that place. Steer right clear. His snowshoe bindings were as tight as they were ever going to be. He stood up and stared back at the concrete ring, almost completely submerged in the snow. And what he saw at the end he had exited from froze his heart. There was a circular patch of darkness at the end of it, a fold of shadow that marked the hole he'd dug to get down inside. Now, in spite of the snow dazzle, he thought he could see something there, something moving, a hand. The waving hand of some desperately unhappy child. Waving hand, pleading hand, drowning hand. Save me, oh please save me. If you can't save me, at least come play with me. Forever, and forever, and forever. No, Danny whispered huskily. The word fell dry and bare from his mouth, which was stripped of moisture. He could feel his mind wavering now, trying to go away the way it had when the woman in the room had. No, better not think of that. He grasped at the strings of reality and held them tightly. He had to get out of here, concentrate on that, be cool, be like the secret agent man. Would Patrick McGowan be crying and peeing in his pants like a little baby? Would his daddy? That calmed him somewhat. From behind him, that soft flump sound of falling snow came again. He turned around and the head of one of the hedge lines was sticking out of the snow now, snarling at him. It was closer than it should have been, almost up to the gate of the playground. Terror tried to rise up and he quelled it. He was the secret agent man, and he would escape. He began to walk out of the playground, taking the same roundabout course his father had taken on the day that the snow flew. He concentrated on operating the snowshoes. Slow, flat strides. Don't lift your foot too high or you'll lose your balance. Twist your ankle and spill the snow off the crisscross lacings. It seemed so slow. He reached the corner of the playground. The snow was drifted high here, and he was able to step over the fence. He got halfway over and then almost fell flat when the snowshoe on his behind foot caught on one of the fence posts. He leaned on the outside edge of gravity, pinwheeling his arms, remembering how hard it was to get up once he fell down. From his right, that soft sound again, falling clumps of snow. He looked over and saw the other two lions, clear of snow now down to their forepaws, side by side, about 60 paces away. The green indentations that were their eyes were fixed on him. The dog had turned its head. It only happens when you're not looking. Oh, hey. His snowshoes had crossed and he plunged forward into the snow, arms waving uselessly. More snow got inside his hood and down his neck and into the tops of his boots. He struggled out of the snow and tried to get the snowshoes under him, heart hammering crazily now. Secret agent, man. Remember, you're the secret agent. And overbalanced backward. For a moment he lay there looking up at the sky, thinking it would be simpler to just give up. Then he thought of... Oh, why the hell is my phone going off? I thought I had that set on silent. Okay, let me just put that in my lap so it won't make any more noise. Then he thought of the thing in the concrete tunnel and knew he could not. He gained his feet and stared over at the topiary. All 3 lions were bunched together now, not 40 feet away. The dog had ranged off to their left as if to block Danny's retreat. They were bare of snow now except for powdery ruffs around their necks and muzzles. They were all staring at him. His breath was racing now, and the panic was like a rat behind his forehead, twisting and gnawing. He fought the panic and he fought the snowshoes. Daddy's voice. No, don't fight them, Doc. Walk on them like they were your own feet. Walk with them. Yes, Daddy. He began to walk again, trying to regain the easy rhythm he had practiced with his daddy. Little by little it began to come, but with the rhythm came an awareness of just how tired he was, how much his fear had exhausted him. The tendons of his thighs and ankles and calves were hot and trembly. Ahead he could see the overlook, mockingly distant, seeming to stare at him with its many windows, as if this were some sort of contest in which it was mildly interested. Danny looked back over his shoulder and his hurried breathing caught for a moment, and then hurried on even faster. The nearest lion was now only 20 feet behind, breasting through the snow like a dog paddling in a pond. The 2 others were to its left and right, pacing it. They were like an army platoon on patrol, the dog still off to their left, the scout. The closest lion had its head down, the shoulders bunched powerfully above its neck. The tail was up, as if in the instant before he had turned to look, it had been swishing back and forth, back and forth. He thought it looked like a great big house cat that was having a good time playing with a mouse before killing it. Falling. No, if he fell, he was dead. They would never let him get up. They would pounce. He pinwheeled his arms madly and lunged ahead, his center of gravity dancing just beyond his nose. He caught it and hurried on, snapping glances back over his shoulder. The air whistled in and out of his dry throat like hot glass. The world closed down to the dazzling snow, the green hedges, and the whispery sound of his snowshoes, and something else. A soft, muffled padding sound. He tried to hurry faster and couldn't. He was walking over the buried driveway now, a small boy with his face almost buried in the shadow of his parka hood. The afternoon was still and bright. When he looked back again, the point lion was only 5 feet behind. It was grinning. Its mouth was open, its haunches tensed down like a clock spring. Behind it and the others he could see the rabbit, its head now sticking out of the snow, bright green, as if it had turned its horrid blank face to watch the end of the stalk. Now, on the Overlook's front lawn, between the circular drive and the porch, he let the panic loose and began to run clumsily in the snowshoes, not daring to look back now, tilting further and further forward, his arms out ahead of him like a blind man feeling for obstacles. His hood fell back, revealing his complexion, paste white giving way to hectic red blotches on his cheeks, his eyes bulging with terror. The porch was very close now. Behind him, he heard the sudden hard crunch of snow as something leaped. He fell on the porch steps, screaming without sound, and scrambled up them on his hands and knees, snowshoes clattering and askew behind him. There was a slashing sound in the air and sudden pain in his leg. the ripping sound of cloth, something else that must have been in his mind. Bellowing, angry roar. Smell of blood and evergreen. He fell full length on the porch, sobbing hoarsely, the rich metallic taste of copper in his mouth. His heart was thundering in his chest. There was a small trickle of blood coming from his nose. He had no idea how long he lay there before the lobby doors flew open and Jack ran out, wearing just his jeans and a pair of slippers. Wendy was behind him. "Danny!" she screamed. "Doc! Danny, for Christ's sake, what's wrong? What happened?" Daddy was helping him up. Below the knee, his snow pants were ripped open. Inside, his woolen ski sock had been ripped open and his calf had been shallowly scratched, as if he had tried to push his way through a closely grown evergreen hedge and the branches had clawed him. He looked over his shoulder. Far down the lawn, past the putting green, were a number of vague, snow-cowled humps, the hedge animals. Between them and the playground, between them and the road. His legs gave way. Jack caught him. He began to cry. Oh boy, it's really starting to come down to it, ain't it? Also, Hyson. Lurking as usual. Okay. Let me like take a break to like have my tea. Okay, how long is this one? Okay, this one isn't as long, thankfully. Okay. Let me take one more sip. Okay. Alright. Chapter 35, The Lobby. He told them everything except what had happened to him when the snow had blocked the end of the concrete ring. He couldn't bring himself to repeat that. And he didn't know the right words to express the creeping lassitudinous sense of terror he had felt when he heard the dead aspen leaves begin to crackle furtively down there in the cold darkness. But he told them about the soft sound of snow falling in clumps, about the lion with its head and its bunched shoulders working its way up and out of the snow to chase him. He even told them about how the rabbit had turned its head to watch near the end. The three of them were in the lobby. Jack had built a roaring blaze in the fireplace. Danny was bundled up in a blanket on the small sofa where once, a million years ago, 3 nuns had sat laughing like girls while they waited in the line. While they waited for the line at the desk to thin out. He was sipping hot noodle soup from a mug. Wendy sat beside him, stroking his hair. Jack had sat on the floor, his face seeming to grow more and more still, more and more set as Danny told his story. Twice he pulled his handkerchief out of the back pocket and rubbed his sore-looking lips with it. "Then they chased me," he finished. Jack got up and went over to the window, his back to them. He looked at his mommy. "They chased me all the way up to the porch." He was struggling to keep his voice calm, because if he stayed calm, maybe they would believe him. Mr. Stenger hadn't stayed calm. He had started to cry and hadn't been able to stop, so the men in the white coats had come to take him away, because if you couldn't stop crying, it meant you had lost your marbles, and when would you be back? No one knows. His parka and snow pants and the clotted snowshoes lay on the rug just inside the big double doors. "I won't cry. I won't let myself cry." And he thought he could do that, but he couldn't stop shaking. He looked into the fire and waited for Daddy to say something. High yellow flames danced on the dark stone hearth. A pine knot exploded with a bang and sparks rushed up the flue. "Danny, come over here." Jack turned around. His face still had that pinched, deathly look. Danny didn't like to look at it. Jack, I just want the boy over here for a minute. Danny slipped off the sofa and came over beside his daddy. Good boy. Now what do you see? Danny had known what he would see even before he got to the window. Below the clutter of boot tracks, sled tracks, and snowshoe tracks that marked their usual exercise area, the snowfield that covered the Overlook's lawn sloped down to the topiary and the playground beyond. It was marred by two sets of tracks, one of them in a straight line from the porch to the playground, the other a long, looping line coming back up. Only my tracks, Daddy, but what about the hedges, Danny? Danny's lips began to tremble. He was going to cry. What if he couldn't stop? I won't cry, I won't cry, I won't. All covered with snow, he whispered. But Daddy... What? I couldn't hear you. Jack, you're cross-examining him. Can't you see he's upset? Shut up. Well, Danny? They scratched me, Daddy. My leg. You must have cut your leg on the crust of the snow. Then Wendy was between them, her face pale and angry. What are you trying to make him do? She asked him. Confess to murder? What's wrong with you? The strangeness in his eyes seemed to break then. I'm trying to help him find the difference between something real and something that was only a hallucination, that's all. He squatted by Danny so they were on an eye-to-eye level, and then hugged him tight. Danny, it didn't really happen, okay? It was like one of those trances you have sometimes, that's all. Daddy? What, Dan? I didn't cut my leg on the crust. There isn't any crust. It's all powdery snow. It won't even stick together to make snowballs. Remember, we tried to have a snowball fight and couldn't? He felt his father stiffen against him. The porch step, then. Danny pulled away. Suddenly he had it. It flashed into his mind all at once, the way things sometimes did. The way it had about the woman wanting to be in that gray man's pants. He stared at his father with widening eyes. You know I'm telling the truth, he whispered, shocked. Danny, Jack's face tightening. You know because you saw. The sound of Jack's open palm striking Danny's face was flat, not dramatic at all. The boy's head rocked back, the palm print reddening on his cheek like a brand. Wendy made a moaning noise. For a moment they were still, the three of them, and then Jack grabbed for his son and said, Danny, I'm sorry. You okay, Doc? You hit him, you bastard, Wendy cried. You dirty bastard! She grabbed his other arm, and for a moment Danny was pulled between them. Oh, please stop pulling me, he screamed at them, and there was such agony in his voice that they both let go of him, and then the tears had to come and he collapsed weeping between the sofa and the window, his parents staring at him helplessly, the way children might stare at a toy broken in a furious tussle over to whom it belonged. In the fireplace, another pine knot exploded like a hand grenade, making them all jump. Also, hi, Arbot. Wendy gave him baby aspirin and Jack slipped him unprotesting between the sheets of his cot. He was asleep in no time with his thumb in his mouth. I don't like that, she said. It's a regression. Jack didn't reply. She looked at him softly, without anger, without a smile either. You want me to apologize for calling you a bastard? All right, I apologize. I'm sorry. You still shouldn't have hit him. I know, he muttered. I know that. I don't know what the hell came over me. You promised you'd never hit him again. He looked at her furiously, and then the fury collapsed. Suddenly, with pity and horror, she saw what Jack could be like as an old man. She had never seen him look that way before. What way? Defeated, she answered herself. He looks beaten. He said, I always thought I could keep my promises. She went to him and put her hands on his arm. All right, it's over. And when the ranger comes to check us, we'll tell him we all want to go down. All right? All right, Jack said. And at the moment, at least, he meant it. The same way he had always meant it on those mornings after, looking at his pale and haggard face in the bathroom mirror. I'm going to stop, gonna cut it off flat. But morning gave way to afternoon, and in the afternoons he felt a little better. And afternoon gave way to night. As some great 20th century thinker had said, night must fall. He found himself wishing that Wendy would ask him about the hedges, would ask what Danny meant when he said you know because you saw. If she did, he would tell her everything, everything. The hedges, the woman in the room, everything about the fire hose that seemed to have switched positions. But where did confession stop? Could he tell her he'd thrown the Magneto away? That they could all be down in Sidewinder right now if he hadn't done that? What she said was, "Do you want tea?" Yes, a cup of tea would be good. She went to the door and paused there, rubbing her forearms through her sweater. It's my fault as much as yours, she said. What we were doing while he was going through that dream, or what were we doing while he was going through that dream or whatever it was? Wendy, we were sleeping, she said. Sleeping like a couple of teenage kids with their itch nicely scratched. Stop it, he said. It's over. No, Wendy answered, and gave him a strange, restless smile. It's not over. She went out to make tea, leaving him to keep watch over their son. And that was chapter 35. Oh boy. My tea is getting cold. And also my vocal cords are getting kind of shot. I mean, it's good because I actually got some like olive oil that I can kind of use to like lubricate my pipes and all that stuff. I have it in like a little like thing, like a little like shot glass, and I'm just like lapping at it like a cat. Man, the taste of like plain olive oil, it's not that good. But hopefully this'll do me a little bit better, I guess. Ooh, this one, I think this one's like about as long as the last one. So I will pour myself a little more tea, if at all possible. Oh, my desk is so like cramped right now. I need to take some time and like clear it off a little bit. Cause I got so much stuff in the way. Take a sip. Ah, there we go. I sent you the funny gif. Oh, thank you. I'll check on that once I'm done with the stream. Thank you. Chapter 36, The Elevator. Jack awoke from a thin and uneasy sleep where huge and ill-defined shapes chased him through endless snowfields to what he first thought was another dream. Darkness, and in it a sudden mechanical jumble of noises. Clicks and clanks, hummings, rattlings, snaps and whooshes. Then Wendy sat up beside him, and he knew it was no dream. What's that? Her hand, cold marble, gripped his wrist. He restrained an urge to shake it off. How in the hell was he supposed to know what it was? The illuminated clock on his nightstand said it was 5 minutes to 12. The humming sound again. Loud and steady, varying the slightest bit, followed by a clank as the humming ceased. A rattling bang, a thump, then the humming resumed. It was the elevator. Danny was sitting up. Daddy? Daddy? His voice was sleepy and scared. Right here, Doc, Jack said. Come on over and jump in. Your mom's awake, too. The bedclothes rustled as Danny got on the bed between them. It's the elevator, he whispered. That's right, Jack said. Just the elevator. What do you mean, just? Wendy demanded. There was an ice skim of hysteria on her voice. It's the middle of the night. Who's running it? Hum, click, slash clank. The rattle of the gate accordioning back, the bump of the doors opening and closing, then the hum of the motor and the cables again. Danny began to whimper. Jack swung his feet out of bed and onto the floor. It's probably a short. I'll check. Don't you dare go out of this room. Don't be stupid, he said, pulling on his robe. It's my job. She was out of bed herself a moment later, pulling Danny with her. We'll go too. Wendy. What's wrong? Danny asked somberly. What's wrong, Daddy? Instead of answering, he turned away, his face angry and set. He belted his robe around him at the door, opened it, and stepped out into the dark hall. Wendy hesitated for a moment, and it was actually Danny who began to move first. She caught up quickly, and they went out together. Jack hadn't bothered with the lights. She fumbled for the switch that lit up the 4 spaced overheads in the hallway that led to the main corridor. Up ahead, Jack was already turning the corner. This time, Danny found the switch plate and flicked all 3 switches up. The hallway leading down to the stairs in the elevator shaft came alight. Jack was standing at the elevator station, which was flanked by benches and cigarette urns. He was standing motionless in front of the closed elevator door. In his faded tartan bathrobe and brown leather slippers with the run-down heels, his hair all in sleep corkscrews and alfalfa cowlicks, he looked to her like an absurd 20th century Hamlet. An indecisive figure, so mesmerized by onrushing tragedy that he was helpless to divert its course or alter it in any way. Jesus, stop thinking so crazy. Danny's hand had tightened painfully on her own. He was looking up at her intently, his face strained and anxious. He had been catching the drift of her thoughts, she realized. Just how much or how little of them he was getting was impossible to say, but she flushed, feeling much the same as if he had caught her in a lewd act. The word there was like, that's something I couldn't repeat aloud. Come on, she said, and they went down the hall to Jack. The hummings and clankings and thumpings were louder here, terrifying in a disconnected, benumbed way. Jack was staring at the closed door with feverish intensity. Through the diamond-shaped window in the center of the elevator door, she thought she could make out the cables, thrumming slightly. The elevator clanked to a stop below them, at lobby level. They heard the doors thump open and... Party. Why had she thought party? The word had simply jumped into her head for no reason at all. The silence in the overlook was complete and intense, except for the weird noises coming up from the elevator shaft. Must have been quite a party. What party? For just a moment, her mind had filled with an image so real that it seemed to be a memory. Not just any memory, but one of those you treasure. One of those you keep for very special occasions and rarely mention aloud. Lights, hundreds, maybe thousands of them. Lights and colors, the pop of champagne corks, a 40-piece orchestra playing Glenn Miller's In the Mood. But Glenn Miller had gone down in his bomber before she was born. How could she have a memory of Glenn Miller? She looked down at Danny and saw his head had cocked to one side, as if he was hearing something she couldn't hear. His face was very pale. Thump. The door had slid shut down there, a humming whine as the elevator began to rise. She saw the engine housing on top of the car first through the diamond-shaped window, then the interior of the car, through the further diamond shapes made by the brass gate. Warm yellow light from the car's overhead. It was empty. The car was empty. It was empty, but on the night of the party, they must have crowded in by the dozens, crowded the car way beyond its safety limit. But of course it had been new then, and all of them wearing masks. What masks? The car stopped above them, on the 3rd floor. Guy rolling by in his fucking, like, motorcycle or whatever. She looked at Danny. His face was all eyes. His mouth was pressed into a frightened, bloodless slit. Above them, the brass gate rattled back. The elevator door thumped open. It thumped open because it was time. The time had come. It was time to say, "Good night, good night." Yes, it was lovely. No, I really can't stay for the unmasking. Early to bed, early to rise. Oh, is that Sheila? The monk? Isn't that witty, Sheila coming as a monk? Yes, good night, good... Thump. Gears clashed. The motor engaged. The car began to wind back down. "Jack," she whispered. "What is it? What's wrong with it?" "A short circuit," he said. His face was like wood. "I told you, it was a short circuit." "I keep hearing voices in my head," she cried. "What is it? What's wrong? I feel like I'm going crazy." "What voices?" He looked at her with deadly blandness. She turned to Danny. "Did you—" Danny nodded slowly. "Yes, and music. Like from a long time ago. In my head." The elevator car stopped again. The hotel was silent, creaking, deserted. Outside, the wind whined around the eaves in the darkness. "Maybe you're both crazy," Jack said conversationally. "I don't hear a goddamn thing except that elevator having a case of the electrical hiccups. If you two want to have duet hysterics, fine, but count me out." The elevator was coming down again. Jack stepped to the right, where a glass-fronted box was mounted against the wall at chest height. He smashed his bare fist against it. Glass tinkled inward. Blood dripped from 2 of his knuckles. He reached in and took out a key with a long, smooth barrel. "Jack, no. Don't. I am going to do my job. Now leave me alone, Wendy." She tried to grab his arm. He pushed her backward. Her feet tangled in the hem of her robe and she fell to the carpet with an ungainly thump. Danny cried out shrilly and fell to his knees beside her. Jack turned back to the elevator and thrust the key into the socket. The elevator cables disappeared and the bottom of the car came into view in the small window. A second later, Jack turned the key hard. There was a grating, screeching sound as the elevator car came to an instant standstill. For a moment, the declutched motor in the basement whined even louder, and then its circuit breaker cut in, and the overlook went unearthly still. The night wind outside seemed very loud by comparison. Jack looked stupidly at the gray metal door. There were three splotches of blood below the keyhole from his lacerated knuckles. He turned back to Wendy and Danny for a moment. She was sitting up, and Danny had his arm around her. They were both staring at him carefully, as if he was a stranger they had never seen before, possibly a dangerous one. He opened his mouth, not sure what was going to come out. "Wendy, it's my job." She said clearly, "Fuck your job." He turned back to the elevator, worked his fingers into the crack that ran down to the right side of the door, and got it open a little way. Then he was able to get his whole weight on it and threw the door open. The car had stopped halfway, its floor at Jack's chest level. Warm light still spilled out of it, contrasting with the oily darkness of the shaft below. He looked in for what seemed to be a long time. "It's empty," he said then. "A short circuit, like I said." He hooked his fingers into the slot behind the door and began to pull it closed. Then her hand was on his shoulder, surprisingly strong, yanking him away. "Wendy!" he shouted. But she had already caught the car's bottom edge and pulled herself up enough so she could look in. Then with a convulsive heave of her shoulder and belly muscles, she tried to boost herself all the way up. For a moment the issue was in doubt. Her feet tottered over the blackness of the shaft, and one pink slipper fell from her foot and slipped out of sight. "Mommy!" Danny screamed. Then she was up, her cheeks flushed, her forehead as pale and shining as a spirit lamp. What about this, Jack? Is this a short circuit? She threw something, and suddenly the hall was full of drifting confetti, red and white and blue and yellow. Is this? A green party streamer faded to a pale pastel color with age. And this? She tossed it out, and it came to rest on the blue-black jungle carpet. A black silk cat's eye mask dusted with sequins at the temples. Does that look like a does that look like a short circuit to you, Jack? She screamed at him. Jack stepped slowly away from it, shaking his head mechanically back and forth. The cat's eye mask stared up blankly at the ceiling from the confetti-strewn hallway carpet. Stared blankly at the ceiling, rather. It seems like we're getting to the good part, finally. That's what Stephen King is all about, like 400 pages of build-up and then like 100 pages of the actual thing that you came for. Also, hello Maho Shoujo. Ah. Big gulpers. Big gulpers moment. I need some more tea because I just drank like half of my glass. Okay, there we go. Alright. That should be good. Okay. Let's see. I think I'm ready for the next one. Chapter 37. The Ballroom. It was the 1st of December. Danny was in the East Wing ballroom, standing on an overstuffed high-backed wing chair, looking at the clock under glass. It stood in the center of the ballroom's high, ornamental mantelpiece, flanked by 2 large ivory elephants. He almost expected the elephants would begin to move and try to gore him with their tusks as he stood there, but they were moveless. They were safe. Since the night of the elevator, he had come to divide all things at the Overlook into 2 categories. The elevator, the basement, the playground, room 217, and the presidential suite. It was sweet, not sweet. He had seen the correct spelling in an account book Daddy had been reading at supper last night, and had memorized it carefully. Those places were unsafe. Their quarters, the lobby, and the porch were safe. Apparently the ballroom was too. The elephants are anyway. He was not sure about other places and so avoided them on general principle. He looked at the clock inside the glass dome. It was under glass because all its wheels and cogs and springs were showing. A chrome or steel track ran around the outside of these works, and directly below the clock face there was a small axis bar with a pair of meshing cogs at either end. The hands of the clock stood at 9:15. Is XI 9? I think it is. I'm pretty sure. And although he didn't know Roman numerals, he could guess by the configuration of the hands at what time the clock had stopped. The clock stood on a velvet base. In front of it, slightly distorted by the curve of the dome, was a carefully carved silver key. IX is 9. XI is 11. Okay, gotcha. He supposed that the clock was one of the things he wasn't supposed to touch, like the decorative fire tools in the brass-bound cabinet by the lobby fireplace, or the tall china highboy at the back of the dining room. A sense of injustice and a feeling of angry rebellion suddenly rose in him, and never mind what I'm not supposed to touch, just never mind. Touched me, hasn't it? Played with me, hasn't it? It had. And it hadn't been particularly careful not to break him either. Danny put his hands out, grasped the glass dome, and lifted it aside. He let one finger play over the works for a moment, the pad of his index finger denting the cogs, running smoothly over the wheels. He picked up the silver key. For an adult, it would have been uncomfortably small, but it fitted his own fingers perfectly. He placed it in the keyhole at the center of the clock face. It went firmly home with a tiny click, more felt than heard. It wound to the right, of course, clockwise. Danny turned the key until it would turn no more, and then removed it. The clock began to tick. Cogs turned. A large balance wheel rocked back and forth in semicircles. The hands were moving. If you kept your head perfectly motionless and your eyes wide open, you could see the minute hand inching along toward its meeting some 45 minutes from now with the hour hand at XII. And the Red Death held sway over all. He frowned and then shook the thought away. It was a thought with no meaning or reference for him. He reached his index finger out again and pushed the minute hand up to the hour, curious about what might happen. It obviously wasn't a cuckoo clock, but that steel rail had to have some purpose. There was a small ratcheting series of clicks, and then the clock began to tinkle Strauss's Blue Danube Waltz. A punched roll of cloth no more than 2 inches in width began to unwind. A small series of brass strikers rose and fell. From behind the clock face, 2 figures glided into view along the steel track, ballet dancers. On the left, a girl in a fluffy skirt and white stockings. On the right, a boy in a black leotard and ballet slippers. Their hands were held in arches over their heads. They came together in the middle, in front of VI. Danny espied tiny grooves in their sides, just below their armpits. The axis bar slipped into these grooves, and he heard another small click. The cogs at either end of the bar began to turn. The Blue Danube tinkled. The dancers' arms came down around each other. The boy flipped the girl up over his head and then whirled over the bar. They were now lying prone, the boy's head buried beneath the girl's short ballet skirt. The girl's face pressed against the center of the boy's leotard. They writhed in a mechanical frenzy. Danny's nose wrinkled. They were kissing genitalia. I can't pronounce that. I can't repeat that in real life. That made him feel sick. Yeah, big mood. A moment later, and things began to run backward. The boy whirled back over the axis bar. He flipped the girl into an upright position. They seemed to nod knowingly to each other as their hands arched back over their heads. They retreated the way they had come, just disappearing just as the Blue Danube finished. The clock began to strike a count of 5 chimes. Midnight, stroke of midnight. Hooray for masks! Danny whirled on the chair, almost falling down. The ballroom was empty. Beyond the double cathedral windows, he could see fresh snow beginning to sift down. The huge ballroom rug, rolled up for dancing, of course. A rich tangle of red and gold embroidery lay undisturbed on the floor. Spaced around it were small, intimate tables for 2, the spidery chairs that went with each upend, with legs pointed at the ceiling. The whole place was empty, but it wasn't really empty, because here in the Overlook things just went on and on. Here in the Overlook all times were one. There was an endless night in August of 1945, with laughter and drinks and a chosen shining few going up and coming down in the elevator, drinking champagne and popping party favors in each other's faces. It was a not yet light morning in June some 20 years later, and the organization hitters endlessly pumped shotgun shells into the torn and bleeding bodies of 3 men who went through their agony endlessly. In a room on the 2nd floor, a woman lolled in her tub and waited for visitors. In the Overlook, all things had a sort of life. It was as if the whole place had been wound up with a silver key. The clock was running. The clock was running. He was that key, Danny thought sadly. Tony had warned him, and he had just let things go on. I'm just 5, he cried to some half-felt presence in the room. Doesn't it make any difference that I'm just 5? There was no answer. He had turned reluctantly back to the clock. He had been putting it off, hoping that something would happen to him, or happen to help him avoid trying to call Tony again. That a ranger would come, or a helicopter, or the rescue team. They had always came in time on his TV programs. The people were saved. On TV, the Rangers and the SWAT squad and the paramedics were a friendly white force counterbalancing the confused evil that he perceived in the world. When people got in trouble, they were helped out of it. They were fixed up. They did not have to help themselves out of trouble. Please? There was no answer. No answer. And if Tony came, would it be the same nightmare? The blooming, the hoarse and petulant voice, the blue-black rug-like snakes, red rum. But what else? Please, oh please. No answer. With a trembling sigh, he looked at the clock face. Cogs turned and meshed with other cogs. The balance wheel rocked hypnotically back and forth. And if you held your head perfectly still, you could see the minute hand creeping inexorably down from XII to V. If you held your head perfectly still, you could see that the clock face was gone. In its place was a round black hole. It led down into forever. It began to swell. The clock was gone. The room behind it. Danny tottered and then fell into the darkness that had been hiding behind the clock face all along. The small boy in the chair suddenly collapsed and lay in it at a crooked, unnatural angle, his head thrown back, his eyes staring sightlessly at the high ballroom ceiling. Down and down and down and down to the hallway, crouched in the hallway. And he had made a wrong turn, trying to get back to the stairs. He had made a wrong turn, and now, he saw he was in the short, dead-end corridor that led only to the presidential suite, and the booming sound was coming closer, the roque mallet whistling savagely through the air, the head of it embedding itself into the wall, cutting the silk paper, letting out small puffs of plaster dust. God damn it, come out here. Take your... But there was another figure in the hallway, slouched nonchalantly against the wall just behind him, like a ghost. No, not a ghost, but all dressed in white. Dressed in whites. I'll find you, you goddamn little whore-mastering runt. Danny cringed back from the sound, coming up the main third-floor hall now. Soon the owner of that voice would round the corner. Come here, you little shit. The figure dressed in white straightened up a little, removed a cigarette from the corner of his mouth, and plucked a shred of tobacco from his full lower lip. It was Halloran, Danny saw, dressed in his cook's whites instead of the blue suit he had been wearing on closing day. If there is trouble, Halloran said, you give a call. A big loud holler like the one that knocked me back a few minutes ago. I might hear you even way down in Florida. And if I do, I'll come on the run. I'll come on the... Come on then. Come now. Oh, Dick, I need you. We all need... Run. Sorry, but I gotta run. Sorry, Danny, old kid, old doc, but I gotta run. It's sure been fun, you son of a gun, but I gotta hurry. I gotta run. No! But as he watched, Dick Halloran turned, put his cigarette back into the corner of his mouth, and stepped nonchalantly through the wall, leaving him alone. And that was when the shadowy figure turned the corner, huge in the hallway's gloom, only the reflected red of its eyes clear. There you are. Now I've got you, you fuck. Now I'll teach you. It lurched toward him in a horrible, shambling run, the roque mallet swinging up and up and up. Danny scrambled backwards, screaming, and suddenly he was through the wall and falling, tumbling over and over, down the hole, down the rabbit hole and into a land full of sick wonders. Tony was far below him, also falling. I can't come anymore, Danny. He won't let me near you. None of them will let me near you. Get Dick. Get Dick. Tony, he screamed. But Tony was gone, and suddenly he was in a dark room. But not entirely dark. Muted light spilled from somewhere. It was Mommy and Daddy's bedroom. He could see Daddy's desk. But the room was a dreadful shambles. He had been in this room before. Mommy's record player overturned on the floor. Her records scattered on the rug. The mattress half off the bed. Pictures ripped from the walls. His cot lying on its side like a dead dog. The violet Volkswagen crushed to purple shards of plastic. The light was coming from the bathroom door, half open. Just beyond it, a hand dangled limply, blood dripping from the tips of its fingers. And in the medicine mirror, the word Red Room flashing off and on. Suddenly a huge clock in a glass bowl materialized in front of it. There were no hands or numbers on the clock face, only a date written in red, December 2nd. And then, eyes widening in horror, he saw the word Red Rum reflecting dimly from the glass dome, now reflected twice. And he saw that it spelled murder. Danny Torrance screamed in wretched terror. The date was gone from the clock face. The clock face itself was gone, replaced by a circular black hole that swelled and swelled like a dilating iris, blotted out everything, and he fell forward, beginning to fall. He was falling off a chair. For a moment, he lay on the ballroom floor, breathing hard. Red Rum, murder. Red Rum, murder. The Red Death held sway over all. Unmask, unmask. And behind each glittering, lovely mask, the as yet unseen face of the shape that chased him down these dark alleyways, its red eyes widening, blank and homicidal. Oh, he was afraid of what face might come to light when the time for unmasking came around at last. Dick, he screamed with all his might. His head seemed to shiver with the force of it. Oh, Dick, please, 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 come. Around him, the clock he had wound with a silver key continued to mark off the seconds and minutes and hours. Part 5, Matters of Life and Death. I think this might actually be like the last part of the last like handful of chapters of the book, actually. May I take a sip? Okay, let's see. How long is this chapter gonna be? Oh my, this one's a doozy. And I saw a couple racial slurs in there. So I'm gonna have to like glaze over those. Hold on, let me take a big sip of tea. Yeah, that's gonna be a fun one. Okay. Alright, let's see. Ahem. Chapter 38, Florida. Mrs. Halloran's third son, Dick, dressed in his cook's whites, a Lucky Strike parked into the corner of his mouth, backed his reclaimed Cadillac limo out of its space behind the one wholesale vegetable mart, and drove slowly around the building. Masterson, part owner now, but still walking with the patented shuffle he had adopted back before World War II, was pushing a bin of lettuces into the high, dark building. Halloran pushed the button that lowered the passenger side window and hollered, "Those avocados is too damn high, you cheapskate." Masterson looked back over his shoulders, grinning widely enough to expose all 3 gold teeth, and yelled back, "And I know exactly where you can put 'em, my good buddy." "Remarks like that I keep track of, bro." Masterson gave him the finger. Halloran returned the compliment. "Get your cukes, did you?" Masterson asked. "I did." "You come back early tomorrow. I'm gonna give you some of the nicest new potatoes you ever seen." I send the boy, Halloran said. You coming up tonight? You supplying the juice, bro? That's a big 10-4. I be there. You keep that thing off the top and going home, you hear me? Every cop between here and St. Pete knows your name. You know all about it, huh? Halloran asked, grinning. I know more than you'll ever learn, my man. Listen to this sassy son of a gun. Would you listen? Go on, get out of here before I start throwing these lettuces. Go on and throw 'em. I'll take anything for free. Masterson made as if to throw one. Halloran ducked, rolled up the window, and drove on. He was feeling fine. For the last half hour or so, he had been smelling oranges, but he didn't find that queer. For the last half hour, he had been in a fruit and vegetable market. Excuse me. It was 4:30 p.m. EST, the first day of December. Old Man Winter settling his frostbitten rump firmly onto most of the country, but down here the men wore open-throated short-sleeved shirts, and the women were in light summer dresses and shorts. On top of the First Bank of Florida building, a digital thermometer bordered with huge grapefruits was flashing 79 degrees over and over. Thank God for Florida, Halloran thought, mosquitoes and all. In the back of the limo were 2 dozen avocados, a crate of cucumbers, ditto oranges, ditto grapefruit, 3 shopping sacks filled with Bermuda onions, the sweetest vegetable a loving God ever created, some pretty good sweet peas, which would be served with the entree and come back uneaten 9 times out of 10, and a single blue Hubbard squash that was strictly for personal consumption. Halloran stopped in the turn lane at the Vermont streetlight, and when the green arrow showed, he pulled out into State Highway 219, pushing up to 40 and holding it there until the town began to trickle away into an exurban sprawl of gas stations, Burger Kings, and McDonald's. It was a small order today. He could have sent Baedeker after it, but Baedeker had been chafing for his chance to buy the meat. And besides, Halloran never missed a chance to bang it back and forth with Frank Masterson if he could help it. Masterson might show up tonight to watch some TV and drink Halloran's Bushmills, or he might not. Either way was all right, but seeing him mattered. Every time it mattered now, because they weren't young anymore. In the last few days, it seemed he was thinking of that very fact a great deal. Not so young anymore when you got up near 60 years old, or tell the truth and save a lie, past it. You had to start thinking about stepping out. You could go any time, and that had been on his mind this week, not in a heavy way, but as a fact. Dying was a part of living. You had to keep tuning into the fact you had to keep tuning into that if you expected to be a whole person. And if the fact of good Lord, this is hard to read. And if the fact of your own death was hard to understand, at least it wasn't impossible to accept. Why this should have been on his mind, he could not have said. But his other reason for getting the small order himself was so he could step upstairs to the small office over Frank's Bar and Grill. There was a lawyer up there now. The dentist who had been there last year had apparently gone broke. A young black fellow named MacIver. Halloran had stepped in and told this MacIver that he wanted to make a will, and could MacIver help him out? Well, MacIver asked, how soon do you want the document? Yesterday, said Halloran, and threw back his head and laughed. Have you got anything complicated in mind, was MacIver's next question. Halloran did not. He had his Cadillac, his bank account, some $9,000, a piddling checking account, and a closet of clothes. He wanted it all to go to his sister. And if your sister predeceases you, MacIver asked. Never mind, Halloran said. If that happens, I'll make a new will. The document had been completed and signed in less than 3 hours. Vast work for a shyster. It now resided in Halloran's breast pocket, folded into a stiff blue envelope with the word Will on the outside in Old English letters. He could not have said why he had chosen this warm, sunny day when he felt so well to do something he had been putting off for years, but the impulse had come on him and he hadn't said no. He was used to following his hunches. He was pretty well out of town now. He cranked the limo up to an illegal 60 and let it ride there into the left-hand lane, sucking up most of the Petersburg-bound traffic. He knew from experience that the limo would still ride as solid as iron at 90. And even at 120 it didn't seem to lighten up much. But his screaming days were long gone. The thought of putting the limo up to 120 on a straight stretch only scared him. He was getting old. Jesus, those oranges smell strong. Wonder if they gone over. Bugs splattered against the window. He dialed the radio to a Miami Soul station and got the soft wailing voice of Al Green. What a beautiful time we've had together. Now it's getting late and we must leave each other. He unrolled the window, pitched his cigarette butt out, then rolled it further down to clear out the smell of the oranges. He tapped his fingers against the wheel and hummed along under his breath. Hooked over the rearview mirror, his St. Christopher's medals swung gently back and forth. And suddenly the smell of oranges intensified, and he knew it was coming. Something was coming at him. He saw his own eyes in the rear view, widening, surprised. And then it came all at once, came in a huge blast that drove out everything else. The music, the road ahead, his own absent awareness of himself as a unique human creature. It was as if someone had put a psychic gun to his head and shot him with a .45 caliber scream. "Oh, Dick, oh please, 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 come." The limo had just drawn, even with a Pinto station wagon, driven by a man in workman's clothes. The workman saw the limo drifting into his lane and laid on the horn. When the Cadillac continued to drift, he snapped a look at the driver and saw a big black man bolt upright behind the wheel, his eyes looking vaguely upward. Later, the workman told his wife that he knew it was just one of those upstanding gentleman hairdos they were all wearing these days. But at the time, it looked just as if every hair on that gentleman's head was standing on end. He thought the black man was having a heart attack. The workman braked hard, dropping back into a luckily empty space behind him. The rear end of the Cadillac pulled ahead of him, still cutting in. And the workman stared with bemused horror as the long, rocket-shaped rear taillights cut into his lane, no more than a quarter of an inch in front of his bumper. He was so kind to refer to him as gentleman. The workman cut to the left, still laying on his horn, and roared around the drunkenly weaving limousine. He invited the driver of the limo to perform an illegal sex act on himself, to engage in oral congress with various rodents and birds. He articulated his own proposal that all persons of African American blood return to their native continent. He expressed his sincere belief in the position of the limo driver's soul would occupy in the afterlife. He finished by saying he believed he had met the limo driver's mother in a New Orleans house of prostitution. Then he was ahead and out of danger and suddenly aware that he had wet his pants. Oh, that's good. In Halloran's mind, the thought kept repeating, "Come, Dick, please, come, Dick, please." But it began to fade off the way a radio station will as you approach the limits of its broadcasting area. He became fuzzily aware that his car was tooling along the soft shoulder at better than 50 miles an hour. He guided it back onto the road, feeling the rear end fishtail for a moment before regaining the composition surface. There was an A.W. root beer stand just ahead. Halloran signaled and turned in, his heart thudding painfully in his chest, his face a sickly gray color. He pulled into the parking lot, took his handkerchief out of his pocket and mopped his forehead with it. Lord God. "May I help you?" The voice startled him again, even though it wasn't the voice of God, but that of a cute little car hop standing by his open window with an order pad. Yeah, baby, a root beer float. 2 scoops of vanilla, okay? Yes, sir. She walked away, hips rolling nicely beneath her red nylon uniform. Halloran leaned back against the leather seat and closed his eyes. There was nothing left to pick up. The last of it had faded out between pulling in here and giving the waitress his order. All that was left was a sick, thudding headache, as if his brain had been twisted and wrung out and left up to dry. Like the headache he'd gotten from letting that boy Danny shine at him up there at Ullman's Folly. But this had been much louder. Then the boy had only been playing a game with him. This had been pure panic, each word screamed aloud in his head. He looked down at his arms. Hot sunshine lay on them, but they had still goosebumped. He had told the boy to call him if he needed help. He remembered that. And now the boy was calling. He suddenly wondered how he could have left that boy up there at all, shining the way he did. There was bound to be trouble, maybe bad trouble. He suddenly keyed the limo, put it in reverse, and pulled back onto the highway. Peeling rubber. The waitress with the rolling hips stood in the AW stand's archway, a tray with a root beer float on it in her hands. "What is it with you, a fire?" she shouted, but Halloran was gone. The manager was a man named Queems, and when Halloran came in, Queems was conversing with his bookie. He wanted the 4-horse at Rockaway. No parlay, no canella, no exacta, no goddamn futura. I have no idea what that means. Just the little old 4, $600 on the nose, and the Jets on Sunday. What did he mean the Jets were playing the Bills? Didn't he know who the Jets were playing? 500, 7-point spread. When Queems hung up, looking put out, Halloran understood how a man could make $50,000 a year running this little spa and still wear suits with shiny seats. He regarded Halloran with an eye that was still bloodshot from too many glances into last night's bourbon bottle. "Problem stick?" "Yes, sir, Mr. Queems, I guess so. I need 3 days off." There was a package of Kents in the breast pocket of Queems's sheer yellow shirt. He reached one out of the pocket without removing the pack, tweezing it out, and bit down morosely on the patented micronite filter. He lit it with his desktop Cricut. "So do I," he said. "But what's on your mind?" "I need 3 days," Halloran repeated. "It's my boy." Queems's eyes dropped to Halloran's left hand, which was ringless. "I've been divorced since 1964, Halloran said patiently. "Dick, you know what the weekend situation is. We're full, to the gunnels. Even the cheap seats. We're even filled up in the Florida room on Sunday night. So take my watch, my wallet, my pension fund. Hell, you can even take my wife if you can stand the sharp edges. But please don't ask me for time off." "What is he, sick?" "Yes, sir," Halloran said, still trying to visualize himself twisting a cheap cloth hat and rolling his eyeballs. "He's shot." "Shot," Queems said. He put his Kent down in an ashtray which bore the emblem of Ole Miss, of which he was a business admin graduate. "Yes, sir," Halloran said somberly. "Hunting accident?" "No, sir," Halloran said, and he let his voice drop to a lower, huskier note. "Jana, she's been living with this truck driver, a white man. He shot my boy. He's in a hospital in Denver, Colorado. Critical condition." "How the hell did you find out? I thought you were buying vegetables." "Yes, sir, I was." He had stopped at the Western Union office just before coming here to reserve an Avis car at Stapleton Airport. Before leaving, he had swiped a Western Union flimsy. Now I took the folded and crumpled blank form from his pocket and flashed it before Queems's bloodshot eyes. He put it back in his pocket and, allowing his voice to drop another notch, said, "Jana sent it. It was waiting in my letterbox when I got back just now." Jesus Christ," Queems said. There was a peculiar, tight expression of concern on his face, one Halloran was familiar with. It was as close to an expression of sympathy as a white man who thought of himself as good with the colors could get when the object was a black man or his mythical black son. Oh my. Yeah, okay, you get going, Queem said. Baedecker can take over for 3 days, I guess. The potboy can help out. Halloran nodded, letting his face get longer still, but the thought of the potboy helping out Baedecker made him grin inside. Even on a good day, Halloran doubted if the potboy could hit the urinal on the first squirt. I want a rebate back this week's pay, Halloran said. The whole thing. I know what a bind this is putting on you, Mr. Queem, sir. Queem's expression got tighter still. It looked as if he might have a fishbone caught in his throat. We can talk about that later. You go on and pack. I'll talk to Baedecker. Want me to make you a plane reservation? No, sir. I'll do it. All right. Queem stood up, leaned sincerely forward, and inhaled a raft of ascending smoke from his Kent. He coughed heartily, his thin white face turning red. Halloran struggled hard to keep his somber expression. I hope everything turns out, Dick. Call me when you get word. I'll do that. They shook hands over the desk. Halloran made himself get down to the ground floor and across to the hired help's compound before bursting into rich head-shaking laughter. He was still grinning and mopping his streaming eyes with his handkerchief when the smell of oranges came thick and gagging, and the bolts followed it, striking him in the head, sending him back against the pink stucco wall in a drunken stagger. Please come, Dick, please come quick. He recovered a little at a time, and at last felt capable of climbing the outside stairs to his apartment. He kept the latchkey under the rush-plated doormat, and when he reached down to get it, something fell out of his inner pocket and fell to the second-floor decking with a flat thump. His mind was still so much on the voice that had shivered through his head that for a moment he could only look at the blue envelope blankly, not knowing what it was. Then he turned it over and the word Will stared up at him in the black, spidery letters. Oh my God, is it like that? He didn't know, but it could be. All week long, the thought of his own ending had been on his mind go on, say it, like a premonition. Death? For a moment his whole life seemed to flash before him. Not in a historical sense, no topography on the ups and downs that Mrs. Halloran's third son Dick had lived through, but his life as it was now. Martin Luther King had told them not long before the bullet took him down to his martyr's grave that he had been to the mountain. Dick could not claim that. No mountain, but he had reached a sunny plateau after years of struggle. He had good friends. He had all the references in the world he would ever need to get a job anywhere. When he wanted luck, okay. That's not luck, that's a different word. When he wanted intercourse, why, he could find a friendly one with no questions asked, and no big shitty struggle about what it all meant. Take a sip? Okay, thank you. He had come to terms with his blackness, happy terms. He was up past 60, and thank God he was cruising. Was he going to chance the end of that? The end of him? For 3 white people he didn't even know? But that was a lie, wasn't it? He knew the boy. They had shared each other the way good friends can't, even after 40 years of it. He knew the boy and the boy knew him, because they each had a kind of searchlight in their heads, something they hadn't asked for, something that had just been given. Now you got a flashlight. He the one with the searchlight. And sometimes that light, that shine, seemed like a pretty nice thing. You could pick the horses, or like the boy had said, you could tell your daddy where his trunk was when it turned up missing. But that was only dressing. The sauce on the salad, and down below there was as much bitter velch in that salad as there was cool cucumber. You could taste pain and death and tears. And now the boy was stuck in that place, and he would go, for the boy. Because speaking to the boy, they had only been different colors when they used their mouths. So he would go. He would do what he could, because if he didn't, the boy was going to die right inside his head. But because he was human, he could not help a bitter wish that the cup had never been passed his way. She had started to get out and come after him. He had been dumping a change of clothes into an overnight bag when the thought came to him, freezing him with the power of the memory as it always did when he thought of it. He tried to think of it as seldom as possible. The maid, Dolores Vickery her name was, had been hysterical, had said some things to the other chambermaids and worse still to some of the guests. When the word got back to Ullman, as the silly quiff would have known it would do, he had fired her out of hand. She had come to Halloran in tears, not about being fired, but about the things she had seen in that second-floor room. She had gone into 217 to change the towels, she said, and there had been that Mrs. Massey lying dead in the tub. That, of course, was impossible. Mrs. Massey had been discreetly taken away the day before, and was even then winging her way back to New York, in the shipping hold instead of the first class she had been accustomed to. Halloran hadn't liked Dolores much, but he had gone up to look that evening. The maid was an olive-complected girl of 23 who waited table near the end of the season when things slowed down. She had a small shining, Halloran judged, really not more than a twinkle. A mousy-looking man and his escort wearing a faded cloth coat would come in for dinner and Dolores would trade one of her tables for theirs. The mousy little man would leave a picture of Alexander Hamilton under his plate, bad enough for the girl who had made the trade, but worse. Dolores would crow over it. She was lazy, a goof-off in an operation run by a man who allowed no goof-offs. She would sit in the linen closet reading a confession magazine and smoking, but whenever Ullman went on one of his unscheduled prowls, and woe to the girl he thought he caught resting her feet, he found her working industriously, her magazine hidden under the sheets on a high shelf, her ashtray tucked safely into her uniform pocket. Yeah, Halloran thought, she'd been a goof-off and a sloven, and the other girls had resented her. But Dolores had had that little twinkle. It had always greased the skids for her. But what she had seen in 217 had scared her badly enough, so she was more than glad to pick up the walking papers Ullman had issued her and go. Why had she come to him? A shine knows a shine, Halloran thought, grinning at the pun. So he had gone up that night and had let himself into the room, which was to be reoccupied the next day. He'd used the office pass key to get in, and if Ullman had caught him with that key, he would have joined Dolores Vickery on the unemployment line. The shower curtain around the tub had been drawn. He'd pushed it back, but even before he did, he'd had a premonition of what he was going to see. Mrs. Massey, swollen and purple, lay soggily in the tub, which was half full of water. He had stood looking down at her, a pulse beating thickly in his throat. There had been other things at the Overlook. A bad dream that occurred at irregular intervals. Some sort of costume party, and he was catering at the Overlook's ballroom. And the shout to unmask, everybody exposed faces that were those of rotting insects, and there had been those hedge animals. Twice, maybe 3 times, he had, or thought he had, seen some move, ever so slightly. The dog would seem to change from a sitting-up posture to a slightly crouched one. The lion seemed to move forward as if menacing the little tykes on the playground. Yes, last year in May, Ullman's had sent him up to the attic to look for the ornate set of fire tools that now stood beside the lobby fireplace. While he had been up there, the 3 light bulbs strung overhead had gone out, and he'd lost his way back to the trapdoor. He had stumbled around for an unknown length of time, closer and closer to panic, barking his shins on boxes and bumping into things, with a stronger and stronger feeling that something was stalking him in the dark. Some great and frightening creature that had just oozed out of the woodwork when the lights went out. And when he literally stumbled over the trapdoor's ring bolt, he had hurried down as fast as he could, leaving the trap open, sooty and disheveled, with a feeling of disaster barely averted. Later, Ullman had come down to the kitchen personally to inform him he had left the attic trapdoor open and the lights burning up there. Did Halloran think the guests wanted to go up there and play treasure hunt? Did he think electricity was free? What page are we on? This is page 404, actually. And he suspected, no, was nearly positive, that several of the guests had seen or heard things too. In the 3 years he'd been there, the presidential suite had been booked 19 times. 6 of the guests who had put up there had left the hotel early, some of them looking markedly ill. Other guests had left other rooms with the same abruptness. One night in August of 1974, near dusk, a man who had won the bronze and silver stars in Korea, that man now sat on the boards of 3 major corporations and was said to have personally pink-slipped a famous TV news anchorman, unaccountably went into a fit of screaming hysterics on the putting green. And there had been dozens of children during Halloran's association with the Overlook who simply refused to go into the playground. One child had had a convulsion while playing in the concrete rings, but Halloran didn't know if that could be attributed to the Overlook's deadly siren song or not. Word had gone around among the help that the child, the only daughter of a handsome movie actor, was a medically controlled epileptic who had simply forgotten her medicine that day. And so, staring down at the corpse of Mrs. Massey, he had been frightened but not completely terrified. It was not completely unexpected. Terror came when she opened her eyes to disclose blank silver pupils and began to grin at him. Horror came when she had started to get out and come after him. He had fled, heart racing, and had not felt safe even with the door shut and locked behind him. In fact, he admitted to himself now as he zipped the flight bag shut, he had never felt safe anywhere in the Overlook again. And now the boy, calling, screaming for help. He looked at his watch. It was 5:30 p.m. He went to the apartment store, remembered it would be heavy winter now in Colorado, especially up in the mountains, and went back to his closet. He pulled his long sheepskin-lined coat out of its polyurethane dry cleaning bag and put it over his arm. It was the only winter garment he owned. He turned off all the lights and looked around. Had he forgotten anything? Yes, one thing. He took the will out of his breast pocket and slipped it into the margin of the dressing table mirror. With luck, he would be back to get it. Sure, with luck. He left the apartment, locked the door behind him, put the key under the rush mat, and ran down the outside steps to his converted Cadillac. Hold on, I need another step. This chapter is still not over. There's so many, page breaks. Good lord. God damn it, my tea has gone cold. Okay. Let me pour some more. Here we go. Also, I probably need some more olive oil. Ugh. I hate the taste of plain olive oil. Okay. Alright. Halfway to Miami International, comfortably away from the switchboard where Queems and Queems's toadies were known to listen in, Halloran stopped at a shopping center laundromat and called United Airlines. Flights to Denver? There was one due out at 6:30 p.m. Could the gentleman make that? Halloran looked at his watch, which showed 6:02, and said he could. What about vacancies on the flight? Just let me check. A clunking sound in his ear, followed by saccharine Montavani, which was supposed to make being on hold more pleasant. It didn't. Halloran danced from one foot to the other, alternating glances between his watch and a young girl with a sleeping baby in a hammock on her back, unloading a coin-op Maytag. She was afraid she was going to get home later than she planned, and the roast would be burned, and her husband, Mike, Matt, would be mad. A minute passed. 2. He had just about made up his mind to drive ahead and take his chances when the canned-sounding voice of the flight reservations clerk came back on. There was an empty seat, a cancellation. It was in first class. Did that make any difference? No, he wanted it. Would that be cash or credit card? Cash, baby, cash. I've got to fly. And the name was Halloran. 2 L's, 2 N's. Catch you later. He hung up and hurried towards the door. The girl's simple thought, worry for the roast, broadcasted at him over and over until he thought he would go mad. Sometimes it was like that. For no reason at all, you would catch a thought, completely isolated, completely pure and clear, and usually completely useless. Maybe instead of olive oil, you could use melted butter? I mean, I don't know, maybe. I need another sip. Okay. Let's see. He had the limo cranked up to 80 and the airport was actually in sight when one of Florida's finest pulled him over. Halloran unrolled the electric window and opened his mouth at the cop, who was flipping up pages in his citation book. I know, the cop said comfortingly. It's a funeral in Cleveland, your father. It's a wedding in Seattle, your sister. A fire in San Jose wiped out your Gramps' candy store. Some really fine Cambodian red just waiting in a terminal locker in New York City. I love this piece of road just outside the airport. Even as a kid, story hour was my favorite part of school. Listen, officer, my son is... The only part of the story I can never figure out until the end, the officer said, finding the right page in his citation book, is the driver's license number of the offending motorist/storyteller and his registration information. So be a nice guy. Let me peek. Halloran looked into the cop's calm blue eyes, debated telling his "my son is in critical condition" story anyway, and decided that would make things worse. This Smokey was no Queems. He dug out his wallet. Wonderful, the cop said. Would you take them out for me, please? I just have to see how it's all going to come out in the end. Silently, Halloran took out his driver's license and his Florida registration and gave them to the traffic cop. That's very good. That's so good you win a present. What? Halloran asked hopefully. When I finish writing down these numbers, I'm going to let you blow up a little balloon for me. Oh, Jesus, Halloran moaned. Officer, my flight. Shh, the cop said. Don't be naughty. Halloran closed his eyes. He got to the United desk at 6:49, hoping against hope that the flight had been delayed. He didn't even have to ask. The departure monitor over the incoming passenger's desk told the story. Flight 901 for Denver, due out at 6:36 EST, had left at 6:40, 9 minutes before. Oh, shit, Dick Halloran said. And suddenly the smell of oranges, heavy and cloying, had just time to reach the men's room before it came, deafening, horrified. Come, Dick, please, please, come. Alright, how much longer is this next one? Maybe if I read this one, like, very slowly. Hold on, I need another sip. I mean, honestly... Yeah, maybe I could make it last like 15 minutes. Because I don't want to like get through a short chapter and then like get through like... This next chapter is very long. So I don't want to like... I don't want to like chance it and like go over my personal, my personal, like, limit. Because I think my voice is starting to go out. Yeah, you can hear it. It's starting to thin out. Alright. Chapter 39, On the Stairs. One of the things they had sold to swell their liquid assets a little before moving from Vermont to Colorado was Jack's collection of 200 rock and roll and R&B albums. They had gone at the art sale for $1 apiece. One of these albums, Danny's personal favorite, had been an Eddie Cochran double record set with 4 pages of bound-in liner notes by Lenny Kaye. Wendy had often been struck by Danny's fascination for this one particular album by a man-boy who had lived fast and died young. Had died, in fact, when she herself had only been 10 years old. Now, at 7:15 Mountain Time, as Dick Halloran was telling Queens about his ex-wife's white boyfriend, she came upon Danny sitting halfway up the stairs between the lobby and the first floor, tossing a red rubber ball from hand to hand and singing one of the songs from that album. His voice was low and tuneless. So I climb 1, 2, flight, 3, flight, 4, Danny sang. 5 flight, 6 flight, 7 flight more. When I get to the top, I'm too tired to rock. She came around him, sat down on one of the stair risers, and saw that his lower lip had swelled to twice its size and that there was dried blood on his chin. Her heart took a frightened leap in her chest, but she managed to speak neutrally. "What happened, Doc?" she asked, although she was sure she knew. Jack had hit him. Well, of course. That came next, didn't it? The wheels of progress. Sooner or later, they took you back to where you started from. "I called Tony," Danny said. "In the ballroom. I guess I fell off the chair. It doesn't hurt anymore. Just feels like my lip's too big." "Is that what really happened?" she asked, looking at him troubled. "Daddy didn't do it," he answered. "Not today." She gazed at him, feeling eerie. The ball traveled from one hand to the other. He'd read her mind. Her son had read her mind. What did Tony tell you, Danny?" "It doesn't matter." His face was calm, his voice chillingly indifferent. "Danny," she gripped his shoulder, harder than she had intended. But he didn't wince or even try to shake her off. "Oh, we are wrecking this boy. It's not just Jack, it's me too. And maybe it's not even just us. Jack's father, my mother, are they here too? Sure, why not? This place is lousy with ghosts anyway. Why not a couple more? Oh Lord in heaven, he's like one of those suitcases they show on TV. Run over, dropped from planes, going through factory crushers. Or a Timex watch. Takes a licking and keeps on ticking. Oh, Danny, I'm so sorry." "It doesn't matter," he said again. The ball went from hand to hand. "Tony can't come anymore. They won't let him. He's licked." "Who won't?" "The people in the hotel," he said. He looked at her then, and his eyes weren't indifferent at all. They were deep and scared. "And the things in the hotel. There's all kinds of them. The hotel's stuffed with them." "You can't see." "I don't want to see," he said low, and then looked back at the rubber ball arcing from hand to hand. "But I can hear them sometimes, late at night. They're like the wind, all sighing together. In the attic, the basement, the rooms, all over. I thought it was my fault because of the way I am. The key, the little silver key. Danny, don't upset yourself in this way." "But it's him, too," Danny said. "It's Daddy. And it's you. It wants all of us. It's tricking Daddy. It's fooling him. Trying to make him think it wants him the most. It wants me the most. But it'll take all of us." "If only that snowmobile." "They wouldn't let him," Danny said in that same low voice. "They made him throw part of it away into the snow. Far away. I dreamed it. And he knows that woman really is in 217. He looked at her with his dark, frightened eyes. It doesn't matter whether you believe me or not. She slipped an arm around him. I believe you, Danny. Tell me the truth. Is he gonna try to hurt us? They'll try to make him, Danny said. I've been calling for Mr. Halloran. He said if I ever needed him to just call. And I have been. But it's awful hard. It makes me tired. And the worst part is, I don't know if he's hearing me or not. I don't think he can call back because it's too far for him. And I don't know if it's too far for me or not. Tomorrow. What about tomorrow? He shook his head. Nothing. Where is he now? She asked. Your daddy. He's in the basement. I don't think he'll be up tonight. She stood up suddenly. Wait right here for me. 5 minutes. Slowly building up points for a hydrate. Oh, yeah. The kitchen was cold and deserted under the overhead fluorescent bars. She went to the rack where the carving knives hung from their magnetized strips. She took the longest and sharpest, wrapped it in a dish towel, and left the kitchen, turning the lights off as she went. I may be gone when you finish. If that is the case, then goodbye, friend. I mean, I was about to, wrap up in the next 10 minutes anyway, so I don't think you're going to be missing out on much. But thank you. Let me take one more sip. Ugh. Okay. Danny sat on the stairs, his eyes following the course of his red rubber ball from hand to hand. He sang, She lives on the 20th floor uptown. The elevator is broken down. So walk 1, 2, flight 3, flight 4. Lulu, skip to my Lou. His singing broke off. He listened. Skip to my Lou, my darling. The voice was in his head, so much a part of him. So frighteningly close that it might have been a part of his own thoughts. It was soft and infinitely sly, mocking him, seeming to say, Oh yes, you'll like it here. Try it, you'll like it. Try it, you'll like it. Now his ears were open, and he could hear them again. The gathering. Ghosts or spirits, or maybe the hotel itself. A dreadful funhouse where all the sideshows ended in death. Where all the specially painted boogies were really alive. Where hedges walked, where a small silver key could start the obscenity. Soft and sighing, rustling like the endless winter wind that played under the eaves at night. The deadly lulling winds the summer tourists never heard. It was like the somnolent hum of summer wasps in a ground nest. Sleepy, deadly, beginning to wake up. Oh gosh. They were 10,000 feet high. Why is a raven like a writing desk? The higher the fewer, of course. Have another cup of tea. It was a living sound, but not voices, not breath. A man of a philosophical bent might have called it the sound of souls. Dick Halloran's Nana, who had grown up on southern roads in the years before the turn of the century, would have called it haunts. Or haunts? Haunts? I guess haunts. A psychic investigator might have had a long name for it. Psychic echo, psychokinesis rather. A talismanic sport. But to Danny, it was only the sound of the hotel, the old monster, creaking steadily and ever more closely around them. Halls that now stretched back through time as well as distance. Hungry shadows, unquiet guests who did not rest easy. In the darkened ballroom, the clock under the glass struck 7:30 with a single musical note. A hoarse voice made brutal with drink shouted, Unmask and let's do things. Bad word. Wendy, halfway across the lobby, jerked to a standstill. She looked at Danny on the stairs, still tossing the ball from hand to hand. Did you hear something? Danny only looked at her and continued to toss the ball from hand to hand. There would be little sleep for them that night, although they slept together behind a locked door. And in the dark, his eyes open, Danny thought, he wants to be one of them and live forever. That's what he wants. Wendy thought, if I have to, I'll take him further up. If we're going to die, I'd rather do it in the mountains. She left the butcher knife, still wrapped in the towel under the bed. She kept her hand close to it. They dozed off and on. The hotel creaked around them. Outside, snow had begun to spit down from a sky like lead. Alright. We're on to chapter 40. Let's see. How many more chapters are there? Let me go back to the appendix. Let's see. Let's see. Oh, we got 18 more chapters. Although, like, you know, going by like how Stephen King structures this, there could be a couple of those that are only like a page or two long for like emphasis. Yeah, I think we might be able. I think we could. I think we could like knock the rest of this out in like one final stream, like next week. I think if I just like hunker down and get through the rest of it, I probably could. I think we only have about like 100 or so pages left. 150, I think. I think I said that last time, but we're still just about the same. Does seem like he's pushing it faster near the end. Yeah, I've like going by the amount of Stephen King books I've like been reading, it does seem like that's how he paces it. Like the first, like you have like a 500 book, like a 500 page long book. The first like 400 pages are just like exposition, and then like the last like 100 pages are the payoff you've been waiting so long for. Which is very interesting. The payoff. And honestly, after we get done with this book, I'm not really sure like what else I would want to read. I'm thinking something about fairies. For some reason I've been in like a fairy mood lately. So like if anyone has any like good like novel style stories about like fairies, let me know. There is one. What was that? There was like a book series I read in like my childhood. I think it was called like Rainbow Fairies. Yes. What if I just like read the entirety of the Rainbow Fairies series next? Oh shit, they were still making books in like 2007. Oh, but these are like different colors. Like the original series was just like red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, and that sort of thing. But now they're doing like Sunflower Fairy, the Orchid Fairy. Oh, now they're doing like... Oh, I see. Now they're doing like flowers instead of colors. What if I just like read all of these? I think that would be fun. I think I would enjoy that a lot. But, how long are they? I mean, they're like children's novels, so I think they're only like a couple pages each. I think. Does it actually say? Let's see. Magical Craft Fairy. Oh, they just expanded this into like so much different stuff. You got sports fairies, music fairies, dance fairies, weather fairies. I think I might have read some of the weather fairies as well. Read an excerpt. I don't know how many pages this is. This is just like a little preview, I think. I don't know. I mean, I have to assume they're not that long. So, you know. Could probably like knock one off in like one stream. I think the Ruby one says 80. Yeah, I could definitely like read an entire one of these in like one stream. Maybe. I don't know if I could like get my hands on it, but if I could, I would, you know. That's something to consider. But yeah, that's tonight that's gonna be it for me. Let me see how we're doing here for a second, because I haven't checked this. I usually do, but I haven't. Yeah, I think we could probably just leave it off there, I think. But yeah, I think we might be able to. I think we're probably gonna be able to get this done next Wednesday. Oh my. So yeah, I think that's gonna be about it for me. Ugh, I keep getting hiccups. But yeah, that's all I got. So I hope everyone has a good morning, evening, afternoon, night, whatever it is, wherever you are. And I love you